Hello and welcome back guys. Today we are going to start new story, The Hero of Orario, written by Anthony Tyler 9. So let's begin. A hero reborn. Izuku was staring at the amalgamation of All for One as he came out from below Shigaraki and consuming his vestige entirely. Izuku fell back watching as All for One proclaimed his victory after managing to finally take control back away from Tomura with thanks to Izuku. And for that, the boy was then blasted out of the Vestige World by All for One, and whilst in his child form within the Vestige World, Izuku was highly aware of the fact that he lost the previous users as well as his arms. On the outside however he laid on the ground, all the pain and exhaustion coming through his body in waves. Struggling to stand back up, he was on his knees staring at the incoming new form of Tomura with All for One at the reins this time. Unlike the world where Izuku had managed to hold out long enough for his classmates and teacher to arrive on the battlefield, All for One immediately attacked. Using a quirk that he had thought was no use to him before appearing before Izuku in microseconds. Placing a hand on Izuku's face, the young man was thinking that he was going to be decayed in milliseconds before he noticed a white light entering his vision. For providing me the perfect chance to take control of young Tomura, I am giving you a quick and painless death. Midoriya Izuku. Be honored to be killed by the new demon king of this world. All for One said, before activating his quirk. Jaya Hoya. Izuku screamed in agony as a white pillar of energy poured out from all around Izuku's form. Within seconds, like Izuku predicted, his entire body was gone from the plane of existence that All for One stood on. He looked in another direction as he saw the incoming heroes and hero students as they looked around the battlefield for Deku. All for One smiled to himself. Not only had Midoriya granted him the ability to take over One for All, but he gave him the ability to kill all his friends and teachers who he held dear. Nothing would be standing in his way from killing everyone and taking over the world like a true demon lord would. But before he could enact his plans, he felt something odd about his body and was forced back into the Vestige World. You just killed the person who was helping us, brother. I will not allow you to take away the hard work of Midoriya-kun. A familiar voice said, as All for One stared at a small white flame. What are you going on about, brother? All for One questioned. He brought One for All back to All for one specific reason. Yoichi's voice said, as multiple vestiges appeared behind him. What is the meaning of this, Yoichi? All for One yelled angrily. I'm bringing peace to the world in the place of Midoriya Izuku, your true son. Yoichi Shigaraki said, before using his power over One for All within the Vestige World, causing everything to break down. No. My dream of becoming the Demon Lord. You're taking that from me. All for One said, scrambling to control all of his quirks. After today, brother, nobody will remember the Demon Lord who hid under the bed. Yoichi said, before everything went white in the Vestige World. In another world, one called Gekai, a young woman was working at a ramen stand as she hummed to herself happily taking customers' orders. Some even flirted with her as she just dismissed them before noticing something off in the distance in the sky. Calling her boss asking to leave for a moment, he allowed it as he took notice of the weird object falling from the sky. He looked to his patrons who all shrugged their shoulders and mentioned that it might be a new god or goddess coming from heaven to visit. The girl ran towards the outer edge of the city of Orario as she followed the white light coming down near the gate. She saw that the guards were on high guard, no pun intended, as they watched the light appear right in front of the city's walls. Everyone who was in line to see if they could get into the city moved out of the way as the pillar of light had smashed into the ground. Rushing into the smoke and debris, the girl had rushed to see who would be visiting Orario this time from heaven. She was however taken by surprise when the pillar of light disappeared, revealing a very highly injured young boy. Picking him up immediately, she ran out of the smoke, causing everyone nearby to immediately throw up their lunch at how bad the boy looked. He had green and black hair that was messy but seemed fluffy, but he had BLD all over his body, missing his arms around the wrist and beyond that. His entire body was shown with gashes and gnarly scars from his arms around the bicep muscle and his torso. His clothing attire however were what scared the girl entirely. It looked as though he came here from a massive battle that happened, and he had lost very severely. The girl ran through the streets of Orario coming towards one of her best friends within the city as she started to bang on her front door. There was no sound until she began to scream out for the person inside to assist her with the current problem at the moment. Hephaestus. Please help me. There's been an incident. The girl said, as the woman opened her door. Come on. Don't let him die. Hephaestus said, pulling the short girl inside. Throwing the boy onto the table, they heard him groan slightly in pain before his breathing slowed even more. Hephaestus was a blacksmith, not a healer, so she called someone to help her and her friend out. She knew that this was an emergency, so she wouldn't ask for her to pay her back with something this high. Not right now when things are at the worst. There were many things on her mind as to who the boy was, but each time she asked her friend Hestia, she never spoke. There was a knock at the door as the two opened it to see a good friend of theirs enter with a few high-grade healing potions. I came here as fast as I could. When I heard that a boy was incredibly injured, I grabbed as many of my potions as possible. The man said, as Hephaestus smiled. Come on, just give him the potions. Me and Hestia need to talk in the other room. If a girl with white hair enters here searching for Hestia, send them back here, Mayak. Hephaestus said as Mayak nodded. Deep within the recess of his mind, Izuku stared at the diminishing vestige world of One for All. He let out a pained cry of agony as he felt as though he failed in his mission to save the world from All for One. He lost every single bit of the power of One for All, and that also meant all those who he had gained a bond within the quirk as well. Yoichi, Nana, All Might, En, Hikage, Banjo was all gone, and there was literally nothing he could do to bring them back. He gave Tomura One for All in order to save the man from himself as well as All for One. And what happened? All for One was given a good time to take over whilst Tomura was flaying away inside the Vestige World. He caused the destruction of his world, and All for One won the battle and the war between All for One and One for All. He left his mom, Eri, Uraraka and Ida, the rest of his class, Aizawa-sensei, and he didn't even have the chance to say goodbye. He was suddenly pulled from his dreamless sleep as he groaned outside in the middle of the room. He felt around with his arm as he stopped suddenly, before opening his eyes and looking down at his arms. He found that both of them were still there, as if nothing had even happened to them in the first place at all. He began to think about what happened before taking a closer look at his surroundings for where he was sleeping. He was on a small couch in the living room of a weird-looking home interior. Sitting up, he groaned a bit louder before he heard some footsteps coming towards the room and slamming the door open. Are you okay? A short girl called out, rushing towards him. What happened? Why are my arms back to normal? Where is All for One? Izuku said, in quick succession as the girl in turn was confused morbidly. I don't know about any of your questions, but you fell from the sky in a pillar of light that normally releases gods and goddesses to Gekai. Are you okay? The girl asked, as Izuku shook his head as he grunted to sit upright. I am fine. Just need to know where I am. Izuku said, as he looked into the girl's blue eyes. Well, at least you're good. Now can you tell me and Hephaestus what in the world happened to you? The girl said, as a red-haired woman entered the room wearing an eye patch. Yeah, Hestia here brought you into my shop with you missing most of your wrists and hands. All that were left of them were bloody stumps. Mayak had to use multiple high-grade potions to bring them back through regeneration. Hephaestus said, as Izuku stared at both of them for a second. Why, you're both goddesses. And one of you is a female in comparison to my world's version of you. Izuku asked, as the two gained curious expressions when he said my world. You're from another world. Hestia called out, as the girl jumped onto the couch next to him. Yes. It's the only explanation as to why I am here and not on Earth. Izuku said, as Hestia looked at Hephaestus. Alright, some explanations are in order. First off, what happened to you, young man? You look too young to have lost most of your BLD as well as wrists and hands. Hephaestus said, as Izuku looked down. I was fighting a powerful villain, his name was All for One. although it was at first Shigaraki Tomura. All for One took control of Shigaraki Tomura before I could save him entirely. Izuku said, as Hestia and Hephaestus nodded along. And after that, I was tossed out of a vestige world created by quirks, superpowers granted to 80% of the people on my world, when All for One essentially used his quirk to send me out. I woke up from the vestige world on the ground without my hands and wrists. I think it was because I held Tenko's hands in the vestige world. Izuku said before feeling as though he might enter a muttering phase. Who's Tenko? Hephaestus questioned. He's the real name of Shigaraki Tomura. Izuku said, with a sad expression. Okay, so he had the ability to take away your hands from mere touch, and this All for One guy took control of his body. Is this right? Hephaestus said, as Izuku nodded. Okay, to be frank, I don't sense a lie coming from you. And from what I gained from your personality already, I don't think you'd be a very good liar. Hephaestus began as Izuku slumped. But that doesn't mean that you are going to get out of this scot-free. You interrupted my day of blacksmithing because you were nearly killed. What happened after you were kicked out of this vestige world? Hephaestus questioned. All for One placed his hand on my head and activated a quirk. I don't know what it was, but it caused so much pain and suffering that I think I died from the surge of power moving through my body. And then I woke up here, not sure how I got here though. Izuku said, looking sad. Well, I think it has something to do with that white pillar of light that appeared outside the walls of Orario. And if you can't return back because you were killed in your world, then that means that this is akin to a second life you can live. Hestia said, as Izuku stared at her. Well, if it will help, what can I do to repay you all for saving my life essentially? Izuku asked, as both goddesses stared at him. How would you feel about joining my familia? Hestia called out, jumping. What is in it for me? Izuku asked, purposefully looking away from the short girl's melons as they bounced in each jump. By becoming a member of my familia, I can give you a fauna that will allow you to enter the dungeon and fight monsters. And you would have to kill them since they are very dangerous. Hestia said, as Izuku thought about it. How would you treat your familia members? Izuku asked, as Hestia smirked. I treat my familia as if they were actually a part of my actual family. Not to mention that I will do everything in my power to make you feel like you belong within it. Just stay away from the entertainment district. Hestia said, pouting. Entertainment district. Okay, what else should I know? Izuku asked, as Hestia looked at Hephaestus. What are you looking at me for? She asked, as Hestia visibly trembled slightly. See, could I work here to create some gear specifically for Bibelchan, and who are you again? Hestia said, before questioning Izuku. My name is Midoriya Izuku. Izuku stated. And Midoriya-kun. Hestia said, as Izuku relaxed slightly. I don't see why not. They'd have to repay anything you owe me in terms of how much money you will need to repay me for staying on my couch as well as using my oars. Hephaestus said, as Izuku nodded. I will do everything in my power to pay back what Goddess Hestia-chan needs to pay you back. Izuku said, with resolution. Alright boy, join her familia. Then I will give you your first mission tomorrow. It's nearing the evening. Belchan might be home right now, Hestia. Hephaestus said, walking into her forge. The two left the building and made their way over to a broken-down church. Izuku had a comical expression as he stared at such a broken-down building before. He shook his head in exasperation. Hestia had the wherewithal to look a bit guilty after noticing Izuku's reluctance to enter the church. Once they entered the church, however, they were accosted by what Izuku had noticed was a slightly taller girl with white hair and for some reason similar BRST sizes to Uraraka. Shaking his head after making the comparison, he watched as the girl moved towards them, quickly looking them both over. Kami-sama. Are you alright? I saw the white light come out of nowhere from the dungeon. I hope you aren't hurt. What about you? Are you alright? The girl questioned as she fretted over the two of them. Hestia-sama, I think I'm going to pass out now. Izuku said, as both girls stared at him. What was that, Izuku? Izuku. Hestia called out, as Izuku collapsed onto the ground outside. Izuku's dungeon debut. Izuku woke up a few hours later as he felt something drip onto his back, waking him up from his slumber. Shaking his head, he looked around only to find Hestia sitting on his back as she stared at his back in both confusion as well as concern. He shifted slightly, causing her to be shaken from her trance-like state as she smiled down at him before she spoke. You know, if you never said that you were not from this world, I wouldn't believe a thing you would tell me aside from this skill you got. Hestia said, as Izuku's face blushed. Keikami-sama, why are you sitting on my back? Izuku asked, blushing. Well, I was making you a part of my familia. And I have to say, why do you have these starburst-like scars on your back? Hestia stated, before asking in a low tone. It's nothing, okay. It was something from my other world that I wasn't able to escape. Izuku said, looking away from the small goddess. Okay, I won't ask you more about it. But you better tell me about your life in that world at some point. Anyway, we should talk about the skills you have. Hestia said, as she allowed Izuku to sit upright. What are skills for in this world? Izuku asked, as Hestia smiled. They allow adventurers to increase their power for a short time as well as utilize them passively. But the skill you have is very weird. It's a developmental skill, and for some reason it's called One for All. Hestia said, as Izuku's face became comically white. Oh, One for All? Izuku asked, as he grabbed the parchment paper quickly. Name, Izuku Midoriya. Age, 16. Passive skill, One for All, allows the user to slowly get stronger in small increments as well as through harsh training. But the stronger the user is, the more power the user can utilize. This skill can also increase the amount of excelia the user gains per defeat of a monster enemy. Always active. Passive skill, explosion resistance high. Due to past experiences with someone able to create explosions from their hands and entire body, the user has gained a very high resistance to explosions as well as explosion magic as a whole. Always active. Passive skill, damage reduction, around 50%. Allows the user to take less damage against enemies as well as monsters. Self-explanatory. Always active. Passive skill, blunt physical damage resistance high. The user has had a history of being in battle and has a high resistance to being in battle and taking damage from blunt objects or those who use physical strength to fight. Is always active. Side skills, black WHP, creates black tendrils from the arms, can make multiple if user wishes. Gear shift, has the ability to slow time around oneself, as well as increase speed of objects the user touches. Float, allows the user to float, but in conjunction with One for All skill, becomes flight. Smokescreen, creates a smokescreen in dangerous moments to user. FA Gene, repeated use of this skill increases the user's power and speed tremendously for a short PRD. In conjunction with One for All can be brought to even greater heights. This is unprecedented. I've never seen so many skills for one person. Not only are you the first person to get all these skills at level 1, but you are breaking the laws of everything we gods and goddesses know. Hestia said, a little hysterical. What's wrong, Kami-sama? Belle called out, rushing into the room with a BR and underwear on. Jaya. Get some clothes on. Izuku screamed as he looked away from Belle. Kya. Sorry. Belle called out, running back into the bathroom. A few hours later, the trio of the Hestia Familia were sitting on the couch within the broken-down church. They were trying to make do with whatever bullshit Izuku's skills were, but there was one glaring issue for the boy that Hestia and Belle noticed about his skills. They were very oddly specific, especially in pertains to how he had damage reduction skills, pertaining to the explosion and physical damage. They were looking at him in worry, but since Izuku had noticed that One for All was placed on the parchment as a skill that was developmental in nature, he just decided to just say F it, proverbially. So over the course of the last few hours, he had been talking to them about the past he'd lived up until now. And needless to say, they were crying at the end as they had no idea someone could live a life like he did up until that point. And to find out that he didn't get the happy ending like most heroic stories portrayed out there. It just goes to show that not all heroes can have the happy ending they wish for, especially for Izuku. However, since he was in their world now, they would make it their mission to see him have his happy ending. Even if it's in another world, but aside from that, Belle stood up and stretched her body. This had the unfortunate side effect of showing her midriff to Izuku, who had looked in another direction entirely as Hestia smirked. I never knew that a hero could give a girl some space. Are you like scared of women, Midoriya-chan? Hestia asked, with a smug expression. And no. I just don't talk to girls a lot. Izuku said, looking away from both girls. Well, we need to head to the guild to get you registered. Belle said, as Izuku immediately got into hero mode. Alright, so where do we go? Izuku asked, as he put his shirt back on, since he'd forgotten to put it back on earlier. There goes the fan service. Hestia grumbled to herself quietly. As the two left the building, Hestia walked out and headed towards her job at the ramen stand nearby. Izuku and Belle, however, were making their way over to the guild in Orario so that they could get him prepared to become an adventurer with Belle. The more money they make from the dungeon, the more chances they will have at slowly moving out of the broken-down church and find a much better place to stay. Walking through the streets, Izuku was being pulled by Belle as she had been showing him the sights as well as points of interest for him to use to get back home. Within an hour of just exploration, the two arrived at the guild as they made their way to Belle's handler. She was an elf who had rather short ears and a very happy expression when seeing Belle, but that happy expression fell somewhat when she saw Izuku. Belle-chan, what have I told you about looking for boyfriends? The girl asked, as Izuku blushed slightly. This isn't my boyfriend, Ina-chan. This is my newest familia member. This is Midoriya Izuku. I think he's from the Far East. Belle said, as Izuku looked at the girl closer. The Far East. You're a very long way from home, sir. Ina said, as she looked at Izuku closely. Krano-chan, could we inform Ina-san about why I'm here? Izuku asked, as Belle nodded. Midoriya-kun is here to become an adventurer. I hope that you can add him onto my information list. Belle said, as she shook Ina. Don't worry about that, Belle-chan, I will do exactly that. Now Midoriya-kun, we need to go over everything you need to know about the dungeon as well as Orario as a whole. Ina said, as Izuku sat down and listened to her. For the better portion of the day, the trio were inside Ina's office as they talked about what Izuku should and shouldn't do when within the dungeon. As well as how far he should really be going when it comes to his level only being at level 1, and aside from that she advised him that he doesn't go further deeper into the dungeon. After about 5 hours of talking about the dungeon as well as Izuku asking about certain facts about the said dungeon itself, he was given his parchment that was saved within the guild. Belle and Izuku left the building to explore the dungeon a bit and gather some kind of money for them to live off of for the meantime. And entering through the entrance of the dungeon, Izuku was in awe of how large it really was, towering over the entire city of Orario itself. Walking through the many passageways with Belle was a very calm and silent endeavor as Izuku utilized the training he had as a hero in training to his advantage. Coming across a small horde of giant ants, the two immediately attacked the horde as Belle went for the left side of the horde whilst Izuku went for the right. Belle sliced through the small creatures, turning them all into small magic stones. Izuku, however, had a different approach. As he came up to the first ant, he immediately sent a kick underneath it and pulled out a knife that Belle had given him. He sliced upwards as it sliced the head of the creature off before he went on to the others and repeated the process. By the time they were done with their first group of enemies, they gathered their magic stones. As it turned out, the bodies of the monsters disappeared as soon as they were killed, and Belle informed Izuku that they'd be back the next morning. Moving deeper into the dungeon, they reached the second floor where the monsters were clearly getting stronger. Izuku was having a slightly better time as he joyfully attacked each monster with his maximum strength of around 35% of one for all skill. It allowed him to still use full cowl since it was his quirk before it was handed away to Shigaraki and was coincidentally killed. Moving quickly, he found himself standing before a very tall minotaur as Belle immediately felt herself freezing up in front of it. Grabbing the girl and moving her out of the way, Izuku went to fight the minotaur. He first kicked it in the gut, sending it skidding across the ground before he activated the side skill of Black WHP and holding it up in the air. He floated into the air as he swung the minotaur around in the whole small dark room they were inside of and slammed the monster on the wall. With the minotaur dazed and stumbling about like it was a drunk, it brought Belle out of her odd expression as she felt Izuku grab her with Black WHP and lift her into the air. "Belle-chan. Go for the final hit," Izuku said, as Belle took out her knife. "Hiya." Belle growled out before lobbing the minotaur in the dome with her knife. As the two landed on the ground and the magic stone of the monster itself hitting the ground with a dull thud, the two collected their prize. But they were interrupted by the sound of something else coming their way before a wolf man had appeared near them. Stepping in front of Belle thinking it's a new monster to deal with, Izuku glared at the new arrival. "Nice. We got some level 2s here," the weird monster boy said. Are you a monster?" Izuku asked, as Belle stared at him in shock. "The F did you just call me?" the wolf man asked. Sorry. Midoriya-kun is still new to this dungeon. He came from the Far East. Belle informed the taller boy. "Ah, I see. New guy coming to the dungeon and getting his first few kills. You better not make the same mistake later on, otherwise I will kick your butt," the man said, before looking at the large magic stone behind the two. "We killed a minotaur, and you're not taking that," Izuku said, as he activated his quirk. "Don't worry, I'm not like those BSTRDS who steal SHT. I was just looking for the minotaur that had managed to get away from me," the boy said, as Izuku just stared at him. "What's your name?" Izuku asked. "The name's Beta Loga. Now tell me what happened to a really big minotaur that was moving in this general direction," the wolf boy, Beta questioned. "Well, me and Belle-chan defeated it," Izuku said, pointing at the large magic stone. "Well, color me impressed. What level are you two?" "Level 3 or?" Beta questioned with a battle-ready smirk. "No, we're level," Izuku said, as the boy immediately sneered at them after a second of letting it sink in. "There's no way a level 1 could take down a minotaur. You have got to be lying," Beta said, as Izuku pulled out the large magic stone. "This I think says otherwise," Izuku said, turning away with Belle. "Don't you leave. We're not finished yet," Beta said, as he rushed to the two. Without even batting an eye, Izuku activated Black Whip and flung the boy further into the dungeon with a small scowl on his face. The boy himself had stared at Izuku with a renewed kind of expression that was bordering on rage. But he kept it to himself as he turned away with a tch. Leaving the dungeon for the day, the two exited through the entrance before Belle let out a massive sigh of relief before looking at Izuku. "How in the world are you so confident?" Belle yelled animatedly with stars in her eyes. I had some really good teachers," Izuku asked, as Belle just stared at him for a second. "Can you teach me how to be more confident?" Belle asked, stars still showing in her eyes. "And maybe later. I wasn't really confident in my past life, so I'm not as sure I can train you to become a more confident girl," Izuku said, as the two walked towards the guild. Escaped monster attacked the two arrive at the guild as they turn in their magic stones to the guild hall's bank so they could get their coins back as currency. And with their collected money, Izuku separates their amounts perfectly, with Belle taking more because of the kill made on the minotaur. When Belle told him to take more, Izuku shook his head believing that Belle needed it more than he did. They were walking through Orario as they overheard about a festival being held soon within the next couple days by the god Ganesha. Belle was also during this time separated from Izuku as she had to talk to a local inn's boss so that she could get something to eat. And whilst Belle was on her own little quest, Izuku was making his way through Orario trying to commit the entire place to memory should he need to move through it in an emergency. Call it something from his past as a quirkless individual in his more youthful time before he was in high school, but it helped him severely in middle school. Especially when he was running away from Kaken and his cronies when they were especially happy-go-lucky about beating up the quirkless kid. Shaking his head from the memory he had the unintended effect of meeting up with the god who had helped save his life, Mayak. "Hello there Midoriya-kun, it's been a couple days since we last seen one another," Mayak said, as Izuku nodded. "Thank you again for saving my life and returning my wrists and hands," Izuku said, with a bow. "No need, now take these. You and Belle will need them for your adventures in the dungeon," Mayak said, walking away and down the street with a smile. "Thanks for the potions, sir," Izuku called out, getting a wave in return. Continuing down the street, Izuku comes across the Hephaestus Familia's blacksmithy. Entering inside of the place he looked around to see what kind of weapons they were selling or making. Not finding any weapons that he could use in tandem with his skills as a hero student in training, he left the building with a small smile on his face. He comes across those who are homeless on the streets of Orario and gives them some of the money he'd gotten from the guild before taking off. They give him their thanks before taking off to get something to eat or drink. Izuku is however, unaware of the fact that he's garnering the attention of a certain goddess who was watching from a very high place. He appears to be very adorable," a shadow mumbled to herself. Izuku met up with Belle later on in the day as he found out that the girl needed to return a wallet to a girl named Seer. Apparently, she was a klutz and couldn't keep her belongings on her without losing them for a few days before someone brought it back to her. And they eventually arrived back at the broken-down church where Hestia was smiling at the two of them as she showed them her score for the day: 3 bags of potato chips. "You know, Kami-sama, can you check on my skills and level?" Belle asked, as Hestia smiled. "Okay, but Midoriya-kun will need to leave," Hestia said, as Izuku turned to walk away. I want him to be here. I want him to see if I am improving as well," Belle said, blushing madly. I'm just going to sit over there and look away," Izuku said, feeling out of place. And for the next few minutes, Hestia was gathering herself and checked the status of her first Familia member. She smiled to herself as she watched the language of the gods appear on Belle's back before she noticed 2 skills on the girl's back that caused her to rub her eyes before letting out a confused sound. Ee. She screeched. "Kami-sama. Hey, are you alright?" Belle called out from under the goddess. I am fine. Just confused as to how you have skills already like Midoriya-kun," Hestia said, slightly surprised and confused. What are they?" Belle questioned, excitedly. "Well, one of them says Argonaut. It looks like you can become that hero you've always dreamed of, Belle-chan," Hestia said, before looking at the second one. "Liaris freeze, is something wrong, Kami-sama?" Izuku asked, turning to look at the small goddess. I am fine, just wondering why this second skill is there," Hestia replied, albeit hesitantly. "What is the second skill?" Izuku asked, coming near the almost shirtless Belle to look at the skill. "Don't look," Hestia called out, pushing Izuku away from his curiosity. Sorry. I was just you curious," Izuku said, looking away again. "I will get it written on parchment paper and then we can look at it together," Hestia said, before getting parchment and transferring the details there. After telling Belle to head to bed, Hestia and Izuku sat still looking at the name of Liaris freeze and how it worked. Izuku was deeply surprised that Belle had managed to get this kind of skill just in the span of like a day since meeting her. Looking at Hestia, he questioned her if she could check his status as well to see if he had the same thing as Belle. And sure enough, about 15 minutes later, Izuku was shown that he had Liaris freeze as a passive skill surrounding his longing to become stronger. But the question now was how Belle was going to get stronger without much of a longing to become stronger herself. You know, you might have gotten Belle-chan to fall for you, Hestia said, looking at Izuku with a funny expression. What are you talking about? How could she have done that, after knowing me for like a day? Izuku retorted as Hestia froze at that. WL, have you ever heard of love at first sight? Hestia questioned, trying to gain leverage. Yes, and from the world I heard that from it's clearly fake. Izuku said, deadpanning. Well, what if Belle-chan admires your strength and wants to use you as a longing to become stronger herself? Hestia questioned. Well, she did ask me if she could be taught to become more confident in herself when we left the dungeon earlier today. Izuku said, rubbing his chin. Then maybe that is how she will get stronger, she will train to become more confident with you as well as get stronger physically. That will increase her feelings of getting stronger over time. Hestia said, slamming her fist into her palm. I can see where you're coming from. But we should focus on other matters at the moment. Izuku said, causing Hestia to tilt her head. And what is that? She questioned. Belle-chan needs a new weapon. Her knife is good to have, but from what I could see about it it's clearly becoming worn out. She will need a new knife soon. Izuku said, rubbing the back of his head. I know just the person to ask. But I will talk to them tomorrow, the godly banquet is coming up in a day. Hestia said, as Izuku nodded. The next morning Izuku woke up with something blocking his vision. Moving a hand to move the offending object blocking his view, he found that it was something very soft and squishy. Opening his eyes a bit more, he found white hair and red eyes above him looking oddly satisfied. Then looking down to what was becoming more and more squishy, Izuku found that his hand was on the chest of Belle as the girl slowly became a blushing mess before a small exited her lips. Sorry. Izuku called out, jumping from the bed. Phooey. Well, I guess I should get started looking for Seer, Belle said, as Izuku nodded blushing too. Hestia had given them a farewell early on in the day as she had gone to the banquet of the gods and goddesses. She had told Izuku as Belle waited outside for him that she was going to talk to Hephaestus about making a new weapon for both Belle and him. Izuku was against the part of him having a new weapon since he had his skills, but Hestia wasn't having it. But she did make a reference to a game from his world about having him use his black whips to use two knife-like blades as long-range attacks. And now moving throughout the entirety of Orario, the two adventurers were searching for the gray-haired girl named Seer. And considering it was taking them both forever to find the seemingly lost girl in the festival that Ganesha was holding, Belle decided to turn their time out there into a date. Something that Izuku was constantly blushing from. And as they traversed through the streets to find Seer, they eventually found the girl looking around for something in an alleyway. I could have sworn that it was dropped over here. The girl mumbled to herself, moving some trash out of the way. Seer-san, are you looking for something? Belle asked, as Izuku remained not far away. Yes. I'm looking for my wallet, but I can't seem to find where it was dropped. Seer said, looking exasperated. Well, Mia Grand had told me Ryu had found it a day ago in the streets. Belle said, holding it out for Seer, thank you Belle-chan. I can't thank you enough for this. See, could I take both you and your friend out for something to eat? Seer asked to repay them. And no need Seer-san. Just helping you out is payment enough for me. Izuku said, as Belle nodded. Well, that simply won't do. Let's go find something to eat. Seer said, as the trio walked down the street. Over with Hestia, the girl was currently pulling a Digiza at Hephaestus in order to get the stronger goddess to make weapons for her familia members. The woman was initially against the idea considering Hestia's free-loading that the goddess did in the past. But when looking at Hestia closer, she found that the young goddess had found herself a group of familia members who were willing to follow her. And learning that the goddess was loving and caring towards them caused her to change her mind. Just letting Hestia know that she will need her assistance in making the weapons as well as she will be repaying a debt for the rest of her life. Inside the Colosseum, a goddess was walking through the caged area of it as Ganesha talked about the festivities above. She was searching for something that could further her plans of getting the perfect Familia member. And if her scouts had provided the perfect information that she'd asked them to collect, then this boy who was part of Hestia's Familia would be perfect for her to steal. She only needed for him to stare at her, and her beauty would cause him to fall for her immediately. Ruruir. You will search for a boy with green and black hair, he has freckles on his cheeks. And he has the most innocent of green eyes. Do you understand? The goddess said, as she stared into the silverback's glowing red eyes. Jrrr. Groar. The silverback growled at her. Good. The goddess said, before pulling the chains off of the monster. Within moments of being released, the monster took out to the streets in search of his next prey. Silverback versus Izuku thumping could be heard all around Orario as everyone was wondering where it came from. They were completely unaware of the fact that a very dangerous monster was out on the loose searching for its prey. But they were naive enough to merely ignore the bad feeling coming up their spines as they continued on with the festival as it moved about its way. It had officially been 3 days since Izuku and Belle had last seen Hestia, and Izuku was primarily worried over his goddess. Not that he really wanted to be very worried, he knew she could handle herself, he was just worried over her safety. He had also been hearing a weird thumping sound coming closer to his location for some reason, but he brushed it off as something from his past trying to keep him on guard. But as he walked past an alleyway, a weird sensation overcame his mind as he felt a strong pang of pain enter through his head. Realizing what this was, Izuku immediately pushed Belle and Seer out of the way as a very large and meaty hand flew out from the alleyway. It slammed into Izuku's body and sent him bouncing in a ragdoll formation across the street, causing people to immediately scream in fear. Getting back up from the sudden attack, Izuku's mind was racing as he noticed a very ominous glow of red eyes glaring at him from the dark alley. What was that? Did danger sense ping? What are those red eyes? Izuku thought to himself, lowering into a fighting stance. Midoriya. Belle called out, as she rushed over. Are you okay? Seer questioned. I'm fine, you two get out of here. Izuku called out as he jumped into the air. As Izuku leaped into the air, he found that the ominous red eyes jumped after him in the air. As he led it towards an open clearing. He was moving as fast as his legs could get him to run as he moved through the small alleys as well as side streets away from the innocent civilians. He rushed when he saw the clearing and slid across the ground before turning to look at the enemy who was chasing him throughout Orario. A giant monster of a creature appeared from the darkness of the alley as it grinned at him before letting out a very loud bellow of a challenge. Ryo-Eir. You want to fight, big guy? Let's dance. Izuku called out. The two leaped at one another as the silverback monster had pulled an arm back to throw at Izuku with a wide haymaker. Izuku pulled back his left arm to do a very swift and quick jab against it as their faces became very close for their attacks. On the other side of Orario, Hestia and Hephaestus were finished making the weapons that Hestia wanted to have created for her Familia members. The two smiled to themselves as they stared at the small knife meant for Belle, and the two Greek weapons that were once used in the past. Smiling at the creations, Hephaestus looked over at Hestia with a smirk growing on her face before speaking to the short goddess. Alright, these weapons are now created. You are aware of how much you will need to pay me back for this, right? Hephaestus questioned with a sad smirk. Yeah, around 400 million valis in order to pay off my debt. I'm sure Izuku and Belle can help me with paying it off, right? Hestia asked, as Hephaestus smirked. Belle is on the house, I know how much you care for your first Familia member. But no, the real payment is keeping Belle-chan safe, as for the other boy that is 350 million valis. Make sure to not take advantage of my kindness this time, Hestia. I will come after you. Hephaestus said, patting the girl's back. Alright, thank you so much, Hephaestus. I will give them the weapons right now. Hestia said, as Hephaestus chuckled. Hopefully those two Familia members don't get too angry with her. Zeus only knows how much she loves those two. Hephaestus said, before moving back to her familiar blacksmiths. Running through the streets of Orario, Hestia was searching for Izuku and Belle. From what she had heard 3 days ago, the two were supposed to search for Seer and give her the wallet she lost from Mama Grand's inn. As she was rushing through the streets, she heard that there was a big battle happening on a certain part of town. And attempting to fight whatever monster was there was basically suicide. Feeling dread in the back of her mind, Hestia moved as fast as she could. As it would turn out, running as fast as one could go through the gigantic city of Orario was very tiring. But Hestia managed to find Belle and Seer first and gift Belle her knife that was given to her through the very kindness of her heart. Although she did notice how Belle looked very worried and was looking everywhere for Izuku, which Hestia found out was currently being chased by something that was after him. Now she was rushing through the streets as she was hearing the sounds of a very large fight nearby and was increasing her pace through her exhaustion. Finally turning around a certain corner, she found her second familia member fighting a silverback monster. That was supposed to be within Ganesha's Colosseum where adventurers could fight it in a controlled environment. What in the world was it even doing here? Izuku-kun. What in the world happened? Hestia called out, as the boy turned her direction. Kami-sama. What are you doing here? Izuku called out, kicking the monster high into the air. Wow, I never knew he could kick something that hard. Hestia mumbled as Izuku landed. This place isn't safe. You need to get out of here, Hestia-sama. Izuku said, urgently as Hestia shook her head. I came to deliver something to you. I was worried about you entering the dungeon without something to carry on you as a secondary weapon. So I had myself and Hephaestus make this for you. Hestia said, revealing a red cloth covering what appeared to be 2 weapons. Why you didn't have to do that, Kami-sama? Izuku said, as Hestia shook her head. Just take them and use them with your black WHP thingies. Hestia said, as she pulled the cloth off. Sitting in her hands were 2 blades that were oddly shaped. They were very long but had short handles as they had blue flaming patterns on each one of them. The blade part of the small, short swords was very large and thick and had a small compartment made for his black WHP quirk to hold onto that way they wouldn't fall out of his grip. Although he did notice a certain feature about them, there was a chain connecting the 2 blades that he could wrap around his arms at the wrists. Deciding to just test them out here and now, he wrapped the chains on his wrists and held the blades in his hands. He felt a rush of power move through his veins as he felt the weapons bond with his very soul. It was as though a piece he never knew was there was returned. Smiling at the falling silverback monster, he stepped back out into the light as the creature landed on its feet before growling at him. Jumping into the air, Izuku used his speed to rush around the creature as it slammed its fists into the ground as he dodged each attack. He swung a blade out and sliced right through one of its arms as it moved backwards holding the handless limb. Jumping into the air now, Izuku was now falling with the wind blasting past his hair causing it to flap. He pulled his arms back behind him as he began to spin very quickly, even calling upon One for All in order to speed him up faster. Soon he became a spinning top in the air as the air suddenly began to add onto his speedy spin slice from above. The silverback looked up and pulled its arm up to block with the metal plate on its wrist when a clanging sound was heard. The clang then turned into a searing sound that was ear-piercing and was digging into the metallic guard. But without much further defense, the swords that were held in Izuku's hands were soon cutting through flesh and even more metal as the arm came off. Landing on the ground, Izuku turned to look back up at the beast as it cried out in pain before Izuku tossed his weapons in the air and used black WHP to catch them and then threw them at the beast. Slamming into its rough hide, they caused some blood to leak out as Izuku pulled down on them, forcing the beast's head to Izuku's height. With a slam, the silverback monster was on the ground at the mercy of Izuku as he stood in front of it with them growling at him in fury. Pulling the blades from the beast's pectoral muscles, Izuku then slammed each one onto its back and yanked upwards with black WHP, sending the beast flying into the air once more. Pulling the blades back down to himself, Izuku jumped and began to spin in the air once more, but this time using the chains to spin the blades instead of black WHP. Deciding to add another couple of his skills into the mix to make it even more of a feat, Izuku muttered "Fa Gene" and gear shift into his next words as the sword suddenly became much more agile and span faster in the air. The silverback monster then fell on the blades as they sliced him in half, his BLD falling towards the ground in a massive display of power. And before the BLD could even hit the ground, they disappeared into dust as a massive magic stone slammed into the ground as Izuku landed on top of it, raising his blade-covered fist into the air. Well, that was oddly satisfying. Izuku panted as he felt the effects of gear shift. That was amazing. Hestia called out, whilst running to him. Sorry Kami-sama, but I think I need a break. Izuku said, as he fell to a knee in exhaustion. Hey, don't worry about that. You defeated a monster that would have required a level 2 or 3 to take on without any troubles. You did perfectly fine. Hestia complimented as Izuku blushed. And never was able to take compliments. Izuku muttered as he smiled. Come on, let's get you back home. Bell-chan has some food to fill you up after a fight like this. Hestia said, as Izuku placed the magic stone in his bag. Off in the distance, from a tower where a woman sat in a throne, she smiled. Her white hair with red markings had flowed with the wind as they breezed past her body as she stood up. Her black and red marked body showing her appealing physique as she walked towards the edge of her tower. She smirked at how Izuku and Hestia were walking away with the smaller goddess holding him up slightly as Izuku mostly walked with a limp. Fufufu. He's definitely the boy I have always wanted. Now, just to turn him away from that lowly big bub goddess. The woman said, before giggling. Kami-sama. We have news from the dungeon. A familiar member of hers called out. What is it? She asked, looking at the very strong child. We have reason that a minotaur has been killed by that very boy and the white-haired girl who travels with him. The familiar member said, as the woman smirked. Who is the white-haired girl? She might be a good familiar member as well. She asked. Goddess Freya, we have reason to believe her name is Cranel Bell. And the boy's name is Midoriya Izuku. The familiar member said, giving the woman a name. Cranel Bell and Midoriya Izuku, HM. My, those are some very heroic names. I can't wait to stuck you into my familia. Nobody can escape my charm. Freya said, as she giggled into maniacal laughter as her familia member joined in. Don't you laugh with me. Freya called out, slightly miffed. Apologies Kami-sama. The familia member cried out before leaving. Back to the dungeon we go. Izuku rushed through a corridor as he led a group of monsters not far behind himself. He jumped to the ceiling of the corridor as he leaped over towards where a small wall was made before a girl jumped out from behind. Sprinting through the small horde dealing small blows, the white-haired girl gained a serious expression as Izuku landed in the middle of the group, sending a horizontal kick killing each of the group before they turned into small magic stones. The two smiled at one another before giving the other a high five before collecting their haul for the day. Walking down the corridor to take the pathway back towards the entrance of the dungeon, the two conversed about their training with their weapons. So have you been getting better at knife combat? Izuku asked, as he walked next to Bell. I've been training hard. It's really good to know how to use knives since they are my favorite weapon of choice. Bell said, raising her arms in the air to stretch. That's well and good. Just make sure that you know how to do close quarters combat without your weapon. You never know when you will be without it. Izuku warned as the girl giggled. I know Izu. It's hard to imagine that it's been a few more days since the silverback incident. Bell said, with a forlorn expression. Don't worry about that incident, Bell-chan. I was able to handle it, I was trained for anything. Izuku said, chuckling. But that doesn't mean that you should take on every single big threat that comes to our familia. Bell said, urgently staring at him in shock. Why, you're right, Bell-chan. I shouldn't take care of everything on my own. I've lived on my own for so long in my world that I've just got to work the asking for help thing back into my mindset. Izuku said, scratching the back of his neck. You had better learn that, because I don't want to turn around and find you dead to a particularly strong enemy that could have been defeated had we teamed up. Bell said, as the two finally left the dungeon. The two continued walking forwards to the guild as they thought about how to get more Valis coins to pay off the debt their goddess took on for them. But as they were about to enter the building, a small ping of danger sense hit Izuku as he immediately pulled Bell to the side. And within seconds the area the two were about to move into was turned into smoke and debris as Izuku opened the door. Inside the room was a new blacksmith that held a girl with pink dreadlocks as well as scope-like eyes. She walked out of the room before coughing slightly as she felt something pat her head in fondness. Mr. 10,000, it's been so long. How are you doing? The ever-eccentric Hatsum Mei asked with a smile on her face. Mei, what happened back in our world? How are you here? Izuku asked, incredulously. Oh, I blew something up within the UA fortress and kind of got myself killed. Mei said, uncharacteristically meek. I swear, you really need to stay away from explosions, Hatsum-san. Izuku said, pulling the girl in for a hug. Izuku, who is this? Bell asked, as Izuku smiled at the white-haired girl. Bell-chan, this is Hatsum Mei. Hatsum, this is Crano Bell-chan. Izuku introduced the two girls to each other. Are you treating Mido-kun with kindness? Hatsum asked, as Bell stepped back a little. Why yes. Bell said, as she stuttered at the entrance of her personal space. That's fine. I am married to my work after all. Oh. I have some new gear for the two of you. Come in. Hatsum said, as she pulled the duo inside. Inside the small forge that was gifted to Hatsum by Hephaestus, the trio were walking through the small place as they looked at all the weapons the dreadlock-haired girl made. Izuku smiled in fondness as he saw all the weapons that the girl made and was reminded of better times in his world where the chaotic girl was making his equipment because of how dangerous his quirk was. They arrived inside of the force where they found Hatsum picking up a weapon that was made from the hardest material she could buy. Okay, so this material is so dense and tough that I had it tested against everything I could think of that could cause harm. And I can say without any problems, that this little chest plate can protect you from exactly almost everything. Hatsum said, lifting her arms into the air. It's super light. How did you find a material that was super tough, dense and light to make this? Bell asked, as Hatsum used her thumb to move across her lips. That is a trade secret. She said, happily before turning to Izuku. Now for you Mr. 10,000. I have made a restructured gauntlet that I had made from your previous set from our world. Now though it's tougher as well as more streamlined with your lean physique. Hatsum said, pulling out two gauntlets made of the same material as Bell's chest plate. Thanks Hatsum-san. This means a lot to me, now I have something to think back to our world really, thank you. Izuku said, small tears falling from his eyes bringing the blacksmith girl into a hug uncaring about how he got soot on his chest. Another happy customer. I just hope that I can get more than you too. Hatsum said, before chuckling slightly. May you could be our personal blacksmith if you want. Bell asked, as Hatsum shook her head. If I was your personal blacksmith, I wouldn't get paid. I'm a blacksmith for hire after all. Mei said, cackling madly. More than a few minutes later the two were walking back to the broken-down church as they waited for their goddess to return back home. They placed the Valis that they'd collected for the day in a small jar nearby and hid it underneath a small piece of the floorboard. They had already collected around 20,000 Valis for their debt to Hephaestus and they weren't going to give her any less. In fact Izuku was planning on giving the woman at least 450 million Valis just for making the weapons for him. The two got into their places where they'd eventually fall asleep at. Izuku gave Bell the bed with their goddess since he was a good bean. The next morning however the two left early so that they could kill some monsters and stay for a lot longer than the previous day. Moving through the streets in the early part of the morning, the two finally arrived at the guild to get their morning drinks of choice to prepare themselves for their adventure. Whilst Bell was getting their drinks, Izuku was doing some stretches as he balanced himself on his blade's tip whilst doing upside-down stretches. By the time Bell came back, she had noticed that he was back to training before she decided to join him by doing some light exercises. Once the time was ready for the two of them to be warmed up and prepared for anything, they left the guild house and entered the dungeon. Hestia was working at her small stand. Moving quickly through the depths of the dungeon, the two killed any and all monsters that got in their way as they collected their magic stones. Reaching the lower floor of floor 5, they moved about the place as they gathered their magic stones and killed monsters. Rinse and repeat that. CYCL. The two were making a quick buck through the very large monsters that they were killing. Eventually, however, the two arrived at floor 6 even though they were level 1 respectively. They cautiously moved throughout the floor, taking down giant ants as well as small yetis, earning quite the number of magic stones for their exploration. Izuku, when he and Bell took a break, made small maps of the area since he wanted to make sure that he and Bell didn't get lost. Moving through the trees and small branches of bushes of the 6th floor was very hard considering the fact that monsters of all kinds appeared to ambush them. Izuku was a very much godsend for his danger sense skill that allowed him to detect any kind of foe who wished to kill them. And by the time they looked at the sky within the place, they sighed before making their way back towards the dungeon's entrance. They killed any monsters that had respawned in the area since their departure and earned some more magic stones for their trouble. Moving back into floor 5, the two stretched their limbs as they regained some stamina from the constant running. Based on what Bell told him, the dungeon closes its door during the evening, meaning that the monsters can kill whoever is left inside without discrimination. The two reached the edge of the entrance and managed to pass through it by the time it closed its doors. Letting out a breath of fresh air, the two gave one another a high five as they knew about what their next training regimen will be. The two slowly walked over to the guild hall as they counted the many bags of their magic stones they'd collected over the day. And once they were inside of the hall and gave their stones up to the guild bank, they were given around 100,000 valis for their troubles. The two were so happy for their increase of pay that they walked into the courtyard with happy faces. At least, that was until they found a small anthropomorphic animal girl. Although she didn't look more animal than most others, she just had the ears and tail. She was definitely shorter than Izuku and Bell as she only made it up to their chests in height. But she could hold a lot of weight on her back from the bag over her shoulder showed the two of them, but her expression was what got their attention the most. Walking over to the girl, she had a very sad expression as she looked at her amount for the day. And once they loomed over the girl, she immediately thought they were someone else asking if they could take her money later. But was surprised when she felt two hands patting her head at the same time, but different spots. Taking a chance to glance up at the two, she saw their concerned expression as they sat down next to her. "Who keeps taking the money from you?" Izuku asked, curiously. Just my familia. They want me to pay them back for housing me. I really need to pay them off so I can be free," the girl said, as she sniffled. "How much do you need to pay them?" Bell asked, as the girl sniffled more. "I need 100,000 valis and my debt to them will be gone," the girl said, as she rubbed her eyes. "Bell, how much valis did you get on your own?" Izuku asked, as Bell thought about it. "I think I got around 80,000 valis." "What about you?" Bell questioned. "Well, I got myself around 120,000 valis from the very large monsters I killed. Here, let me give you something," Izuku said, pulling a small rug sack filled with valis. What are you doing?" the dreadfully short girl questioned immediately. "What am I doing?" Izuku asked, with a tilt of his head, causing Bell's heart to skip a beat. "Yes. What are you doing?" she asked. "Well, I'm giving you 100,000 valis. It's not like I need it at the moment, and I can get more of it tomorrow, so there's no reason for me not to give it away," Izuku said, as he handed the bag of money to the girl. "Why?" the girl asked. "Because you indirectly asked for help, and I used to be a hero student from my world. So this is me being the hero you need at the moment. Izuku said, with a smile. And my name is Lily. And nice to meet you. The girl, Lily said, bowing. Midoriya Izuku, and this is Crano Bell-chan. Izuku said, introducing himself and Bell. See, could I help you all in collecting magic stones from the dungeon tomorrow? You both surely can't hold on to it the entire time you're in there, right? Lily asked, worriedly. I mean, why not? Bell asked, as Izuku thought about it. I mean, the more the merrier. I wouldn't mind having a third-party member. Izuku said, holding out a hand. The girl just stared at his hand for a moment, before small tears fell from her eyes as she held Izuku's hand as their contract was made. A small light appearing around the two to signify their contract before Izuku saw a small paper tattoo on his hand, which he smiled. I take it that this is our contract? Izuku asked, as Lily nodded. Well, far be it from me to say no. See you tomorrow, Lily-chan. Come on, Bell-chan, we need to tell Hestia-sama about the day. Izuku said, leading Bell away. Behind Lily, however, two men were staring at her in shock and anger. They were sure to make her day tomorrow a pain in the butt, as well as threaten her later on. But that can wait, only time will tell when they are found out. Izuku, the Emerald Dragon of Kindness. Izuku was seen walking around Orario. He had nothing better to do since Hestia and Bell went to the baths in order to get themselves cleaned up. He was now left with nothing much to do, and he just decided to enter the dungeon to make some more money. He was casually walking through the dungeon when he heard the sounds of a struggle happening nearby. And moving as quickly and quietly as possible, he found himself the witness to a bunch of people attacking Lily as she was struggling to hold her back of Valis in her grip. For the last time. I will be paying you guys back tomorrow. I just needed to collect a few more Valis. Lily said, as she tugged on the bag as hard as she could. Yeah, right. Your debt to us has increased, and we're taking that money so that you can give us more. The young man said, as he punched Lily in the face, knocking her to the ground. Hey! That's the money that was given to me. Lily called out, as she stood back up. Not anymore. The young man said, rushing to get away. I'm sure that you have a reason for stealing Valis that doesn't belong to you. Izuku's voice called out, causing the young man to stop. What the, who are you and where are you? The young man called out. I'm asking you one more time, I do not like to repeat myself. Why are you stealing money that doesn't belong to you? Izuku's voice rang out again. It's not hers. She stole it from that green-haired adventurer. I was going to give it back. The young man said, as Izuku stepped out from behind the wall he was leaning against. Oh really? Then why did I hear that you were increasing a debt that Lily needs to pay you? Much more, why are you trying to steal the money that I purposefully gave her to pay off whatever debt she needed to pay? Izuku questioned, stepping in front of the young man. You purposefully gave her your money. Are you stupid? She could have stolen it. She's nothing but a filthy Paolum thief. The young man said, angrily. From what I can see, you are the thief. Now give her money back and leave. Izuku said, with a glare. The young man stared at Izuku for a moment before he shrugged his shoulders. Reaching behind his back, he went to grab his knife to stab Izuku when he felt something grip onto his wrist. Looking down, he saw a small black tendril holding his wrist and keeping it from grabbing his weapon. He stared back at where it came from and was given a sight of a fury-driven glare sent his way, and he tossed the bag over to Lily in fear. Once that was done, Lily stared at Izuku in awe as well as some fear in her eyes as Izuku grabbed the young man and pulled him behind the wall. She could only hear the sounds of screams of agony as she just slowly turned away and rushed towards the entrance of the dungeon. Walking out from behind the wall, leaving a bloody and bruised boy on the ground in his wake, Izuku searched for some monsters to kill. He was walking around for a few hours before he noticed the time, and that it was nearing evening, so he made his way back to the dungeon's entrance. He may have been a hero student, but that young man was doing everything in his power to make Lily's life a living hell. And he thought that it'd be karma if the young man was beaten and bruised before being left inside the dungeon. It would definitely be a suitable punishment for him in Izuku's mind considering how he treated Lily. His heroic mind told him that he shouldn't have left the young man there, but his logical and somewhat vengeful mind was telling him that if the young man survived, he could live with a bit of slander. The young man was going to attempt to fatally wound him and possibly pin the blame on Lily, so he wasn't taking any chances with someone as crude and evil like him. And as soon as he exited the dungeon, he heard the sounds of screaming from inside the dungeon as he looked back at the door. It was closing very fast as the young man he left inside was rushing towards it in fear. And just as he was about to reach the door, Izuku saw as he suddenly fell to the ground, and the last thing Izuku saw of the boy was how there was an odd-looking axe hanging out his back. Arriving at the guild hall, Izuku turned in his small number of magic stones as he let out a sigh of relief. Having that young man die was something he didn't want to have to do, but it was for the betterment of Lily's life if she were to stay safe. Once he left the guild hall, he walked back to the church as he gathered some supplies to make the building look better than before. Hestia and Belle were inside already as they were seemingly talking to one another about something he didn't want to know about. And getting right to work, Izuku began to chop trees nearby in order to get some wooden planks set up for rebuilding the church. He only just started when he heard the sound of Lily running towards him. How he knew it was her was beyond him, but as he turned around he found the relatively short girl standing behind him as he was setting up. She looked at him with concern before shaking her head and slowly but surely giving him a hug from behind. "Thank you for doing that. He was trying to steal the money Yuji gave me. I paid off my debt to the Soma Familia earlier today as well," Lily said, as Izuku smiled down at her and patted her head. "That's good, so what was the debt they wanted you to pay for exactly?" Izuku asked, as the girl looked away blushing. "They adopted me into their familia because of the fact that I was homeless. And I was searching for a job so they made me their supporter, whilst stating that I would need to pay them back for their kindness," Lily said, as Izuku shook his head. "A kind person wouldn't ask you to pay them back for helping you. If that were me, you could have left at any time you wanted. Not only that, but I wouldn't have you pay me back for taking you off the street. For them, I believe that they were using you the entire time," Izuku said, getting back to work. "What makes a good person?" Lily asked, looking at him. "What makes a good person is the good deeds they do for everyone. Such as helping when someone falls down, and not asking for anything in return. A good person in my eyes is someone who helps everyone and makes sure that nothing bad happens to them. No matter the situation," Izuku said, as he climbed up the church to the roof. "Oh. Who is your familia?" Lily asked, as Izuku smiled. "The Hestia Familia is the familia I belong to," Izuku said, as Lily shuffled her feet. Is it safe in there?" she asked. I guess you could say that. Although you'd have to be careful about Hestia-sama laying on top of you. Her chest could really block the airflow in your mouth," Izuku said, with a slight shudder. The two remained in silence as Izuku continued to fix up the building before Lily climbed up with the rest of his equipment. She handed him a handsaw as he began to cut another piece of wood to size and set it on the open roof. And for the remainder of the evening, the two stayed up there fixing the roof as they prepared for dinner to be made. It was only later on in the evening that Lily asked if she could stay over for the night since she didn't want to make her familia angry with her presence. And she was immediately accepted by Hestia and Belle as the two took to her like older siblings would an adopted one. Izuku sat on the ground nearby as he focused his mind on feeling out where potential enemies were. He had found a book that Belle was reading recently, and he found a spell that could count as another skill he could use aside from Danger Sense. He really loved Danger Sense, but sometimes he would rather it not give him a very angry headache just for sensing malicious enemies. So he stayed on the ground looking over the spells he could find that could work similarly to Danger Sense. And he found one that worked similarly but at the same time it didn't use too much of his mana for it. The spell was called spatial awareness, something that Izuku had learned back in middle school. He smiled down at the spell that he focused his mind into learning very quickly. As he focused on learning the spell as fast as he could, he did take notice of how there were multiple people coming near the church. And their intentions were not for the good of the people, and as soon as Izuku sensed them, he immediately closed the book and walked towards the door. Exiting the building, he saw the trio of women sleeping on the couch holding onto one another as he closed the door behind himself. Looking at the dark street, he found himself feeling out for where the people he sensed for were earlier. And lo and behold, he didn't have to search far because they jumped down from nearby rooftops and landed in front of him. So you are the one who killed Kanu. Now tell us, what happened to his body? The leader of the group questioned. So his name was Kanu. Can you tell me why he was trying to steal Lily's money that I had given her? Izuku questioned back. We have no right to answer your questions. The leader said, angrily. I won't answer your question unless you answer mine. Izuku said, glaring at the leader. What makes you think that you can make demands of us? We are of higher standing than your worthless goddess. The leader said, angrily. I see, so you came here hoping to kill me and the rest of my familia and take Lily back, am I right? Izuku asked, as they all pulled out Molotov cocktails. If you think you can defeat us, Lily can become a part of your familia. But if you don't defeat all of us on your own, then you will die with all three. The leader said, as he initiated a fight with Izuku. The young man dodged the strike of the leader of the group with speed as he moved his rapier at Izuku. The young man merely dodged each strike as the leader moved his blade at him at very high speeds, but nothing close to the speeds that Izuku was used to. He threw a kick at Izuku, who merely caught it and flipped the leader onto the ground before kicking him back to his group. He cracked his neck and arms before he entered a combat stance whilst the entire group surrounded him from all sides. And once Izuku took a deep breath and activated his full cowling move, he watched as the night lit up in a light green glow. And the group attacked from all sides. Izuku made everything stop in motion for a second as he watched everything move very slowly as he straightened up his stance. He waited for the first opponent to move their weapon at him as he dodged slightly to the left of the first attack. Then he grabbed their arm and moved them in the direction of another blade, causing the user to suddenly pull back their blade in order to avoid a fatal attack. Then Izuku moved to the third attacker before he broke their weapon and sent the blade portion of it into the shoulder of the leader, who fell back to the ground screaming in pain. Izuku then ended the whole gang up on him with a roundhouse kick that sent one of the group into a folded position and sent him collecting the others right into the leader. One of the group had managed to throw a Molotov cocktail at him that he caught with black WHP and threw it back at the man. As he screamed in agony, Izuku used a nearby pail of water to take the fire out and allowed the man to tremble and cry in pain. Walking over to the group of attackers, Izuku glared down at them before kicking them off the leader before he held the man by his hair. Lifting him into the air to be the same height at his eyes, Izuku glared harshly into his eyes as the man just fearfully stared into Izuku's emerald-colored eyes. If I ever see you coming here to kill my familia as well as Lily, you will not like what happens when I really let loose. I was only using about 15% of my full strength, and if I wanted to I could have made your entire body go splatter on the walls. Nothing would be left of your body, as it would be nothing more than a smear of blood on the ground. Now if you don't mind, I would like to get back inside the church and read again. Now scram. Izuku said, as the group and leader rushed off whimpering about a demon in human skin. With a sigh of relief, Izuku walked back towards the church before feeling a new presence nearby. Looking up into the air towards a rooftop, he found a woman with white hair staring down at him. And for some reason he felt his brain suddenly feeling attracted to her for a moment before he shook his head. He did not like the aura of the woman, nor did he feel any kind of love emanating from her form. And he entered the church with an empty mind. What will you do now, Midoriya? With the Soma Familia's reputation, they will surely slander your name. What will you do when everyone calls you a demon in human skin tomorrow? Freya asked to no one in particular. Soma Familia P2. Over the next few days after Lily had been accepted into the Hestia Familia, the trio were entering the dungeon and collecting Valis. They were reaching higher amounts of Valis and were edging closer to their debt to Hephaestus. With the assistance of Lily, Izuku and Belle had been able to focus more on exploration of the lower floors of the dungeon without needing to slow down, unless Lily needs them to slow down so she could keep up. And with the trio earning more money each day, they were loving their lives being spent with one another. Belle had even learned a new spell called Firebolt, whilst Izuku fully mastered spatial awareness. Lily, not wanting to be left behind, had also attempted to learn a new spell to make sure that she could at least keep up with the two adventurers. Currently, however, Izuku was walking through the streets of Orario as he was looking at the rising sun. He smiled at how the sky had become a series of multiple colors as the sun rose into the sky as morning was soon coming to an end. He had left Belle, Hestia, and Lily back at the church as he walked around the town of Orario as he got some fresh air. He passed by Mayaka's little pharmacy and paid for some more healing potions as the god of the pharmacy smiled at him and thanked Izuku for his patronage. Leaving the small pharmacy, Izuku looked around Orario as he conversed with its inhabitants and walked through its streets. He eventually came across a weird section where the inhabitants of that particular sector of Orario was filled with very appealing women. Izuku kept his eyes away from them as he walked through, taking in their very reality of being what the people in his world called wares. Shaking his head at that particular thought process, he continued walking down the street as he noticed someone walking through the crowd. She had long white hair with an attire of red and dark purple markings on her dress as she looked at him with her violet-colored eyes. He stared at her for a moment, before shaking his head and walking away from her location. He was very disturbed by whatever that feeling was when she stared at him. It was as though she was attempting to stalk him just from a look. And that was something he knew couldn't happen, considering multiple people had tried that in the past and had failed. He'd run into his fair share of all-for-one's assassins who had tried stuck actions to get him to lower his guard. He still managed to break out of their stuck attacks and defeated them without any kind of issue. What that woman was doing, however, it seemed as though she was trying to mind control him through lust. He continued walking out of the district before he looked at the sign telling him it was the entertainment district. He shuddered whilst looking into the place before he left. He was making his way back towards the church where he and the others were staying at when he saw movement in an alley. Walking over towards it slowly, he kept danger sense active as he followed the group through the many alleys as they rushed around Orario. He watched as they ran into people who had money and attempted to rob them of their Valis before he appeared and stopped it from happening each time. He shook his head when they were revealed to be the Soma Familia, and as he continued to follow them, he found their base. As he followed them in the early morning, he soon came across their group preparing for what seemed to be a war. He moved closer to the building as he tried to overhear what they were talking about in terms of their plans. "Alright, so you all know the plan?" one of the Familia members of Soma questioned. "Yes, kill the Beaches and take Lilaruka back. And make her pay back a debt that is insurmountable," another voice said, as Izuku growled silently behind the wall he hid behind. "Good, now if there is anything else we need to prepare for, go and do it. We will begin our mission at nightfall," the leader of the group said, as Izuku decided now was the time to come out. "You know, if you are going to make plans about a certain group of people, you make sure that the person you are doing it because of them, isn't nowhere near your home." Izuku's voice rang out from around the Soma Familia home. Where are you? I know you're out there." The Familia member who made the plan called out. "I am everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Honestly, I thought that you had the thought process to actually listen to my advice the other day. But it appears as though I was wrong. I am going to make sure that you all are placed in beds for the rest of your life," Izuku's voice said, as he appeared behind one of the Familia members. He grabbed them before moving up towards the ceiling as the man let out a yelp and scream before he silenced them. The other Familia members had run into a huddle formation as they looked at all directions for where Izuku could be. One by one each and every Familia member aside from the god for their Familia were taken down and dealt with. He appeared in front of one of the Familia members as they moved their weapon at him as he dodged immediately and punching them in the face. They dropped their sword as Izuku grabbed their face and pulled them into the dark ceiling as they screamed before a crack was heard. As the Familia members were now huddled in a smaller amount of people, they watched as a body fell to the ground not moving. They let out a scream of fear before taking off in all directions as Izuku followed the leader of their Familia. He reached down and grabbed the man by the back of the neck before lifting him into the rafters of the house and slammed a fist into his back, breaking it whilst also snapping the spinal cord. He dropped the man to the ground as he cried out in agony before Izuku did the same to the other members of the Familia. He very well could have killed them. But he wanted them to remember to never mess with his Familia, otherwise they will have to deal with him. He was not as kind as he used to be, and he was no longer worried about dealing out damage that could cripple others. He already learned that mistake from All for One taking control of Shigaraki Tomura's body back in his world. He will not be making that same mistake again in this world. If there is a threat to his Familia, he will not hesitate to end that threat. Although he won't be doing it in the same way as All for One did to his followers as well as those he came across. Once he was finished with those inside the Soma Familia home, Izuku stepped outside of the house as he swiped his hands across one another. Jumping to a rooftop, he rushed away from the scene as a group of other Familias had rushed to the Soma Familia home as they took in the scene of a very crippled home. Izuku could feel bad for them as he heard the screams of agony from the men from where he was located on a rooftop. And he watched as the Familias had then exited the building with blood all over their bodies as they smirked at one another. They even held the head of the god that was within the building in their hand as well as they gloated about how the god didn't even attempt to protect himself. Izuku shook his head. He knew that this was something that happened often in this world of Familias attacking other Familias as they took over. But Izuku was more concerned with the mark on their back, if what he recalled they were from the Freya Familia. And if he remembered what that woman from before was, her aura was similar to the woman he saw on the rooftop that one day he walked through the crowds a few weeks back. Leaving the place, Izuku rushed back to the church before it became night once again as he thought about how he kept Hestia, Belle and Lily safe from the Soma Familia. He shook his head as he rushed back in order to be home before the trio woke up from their slumber to see him already gone. He landed in front of the church as he walked into a nearby room to find the trio of girls sleeping on the bed that Hestia was able to buy. He pulled the blanket that had fallen off the trio of girls back over them as they snuggled to one another. Izuku then sat on the ground before he reached over and patted Lily's head, causing her to purr slightly and lean into his palm. Letting out a sigh, Izuku fell asleep on the wall as he felt the sweet release of dreams take over his vision. Prior memories. Kratso Izuku woke up the next morning as he noticed that Belle was completely absent from the church. And as he leaves the building, he walked through the streets of Orario before he finds her walking towards Mei's workshop. He rushed after Belle as he and the girl entered the forge as she noticed his presence and smiled at him. Entering the forge, they had noticed that someone new was helping her. Izuku smiled as Mei was telling the new guy about how to create the weapons she usually makes and without as many explosions as she had done in the past. For the last time, red hair. You need to combine that with the ore that I had collected from the dungeon. Mei said, exasperated. And for the last time, and for the last few hours, you can't combine a loot drop from a monster with the ore that the dungeon gives. They will not combine in the way that you think. The new guy said, as he threw his arms in the air. I never think about the idea that a monster loot drop will not combine with an ore from the dungeon. I will make anything work no matter what. Haven't you heard me say plus ultra? Mei said, cackling. Hatsum, I can't tell you this enough, but that is literally impossible. The guy said, as Izuku coughed. Ahem, I know that you two are talking about blacksmithing stuff, but I need you to make me and Belle a new set of gear, Hatsum-san. Izuku said, as the new guy nodded. Alright, what are we going to make for you two this time? Mei asked, hopping. I would like to have a few sets of armor and guards for my joints. Belle said, as Mei nodded as the new guy went to build them. What about you, Izuku-kun? Mei asked, happily. Personally, I would like to have a second weapon in case I lose these. Izuku said, revealing his chained blades. It will be a bit of time before I make a weapon based off our history, but it's nothing that I can't handle. Mei said, moving to work. What's your name? Bell asked, the red-haired young man. Oh, the name's Welf Kratzo. But you can just call me Welf. I am not a guy who likes formal speaking, especially those from the Far East. Welf said, as he smiled at the two. Well, nice to meet you, Welf-san. I'm Bell Cranel and this is Izuku Midoriya. Bell said, as Welf looked at him. You look like a super tough dude. If you need anything from me, just know that I can help out in the dungeon as well. Welf said, holding out a hand. I wouldn't have it any other way, Welf-san. Izuku said, smiling as an aura of manliness surrounded the two. The two shook their hands, a new bond of manliness forming between the two as Bell stared at the weird aura of the two. What the F was that? Bell thought to herself. Izuku woke up the next morning as he noticed that Bell was completely absent from the church. And as he leaves the building, he walked through the streets of Orario before he finds her walking towards Mei's workshop. He rushed after Bell as he and the girl entered the forge as she noticed his presence and smiled at him. Entering the forge, they had noticed that someone new was helping her. Izuku smiled as Mei was telling the new guy about how to create the weapons she usually makes and without as many explosions as she had done in the past. For the last time, red hair. You need to combine that with the ore that I had collected from the dungeon. Mei said, exasperated. And for the last time, and for the last few hours, you can't combine a loot drop from a monster with the ore that the dungeon gives. They will not combine in the way that you think. The new guy said, as he threw his arms in the air. I never think about the idea that a monster loot drop will not combine with an ore from the dungeon. I will make anything work no matter what. Haven't you heard me say plus ultra? Mei said, cackling. Hatsum, I can't tell you this enough, but that is literally impossible. The guy said, as Izuku coughed. Ahem, I know that you two are talking about blacksmithing stuff, but I need you to make me and Bell a new set of gear, Hatsum-san. Izuku said, as the new guy nodded. Alright, what are we going to make for you two this time? Mei asked, hopping. I would like to have a few sets of armor and guards for my joints. Bell said, as Mei nodded as the new guy went to build them. What about you, Izuku-kun? Mei asked, happily. Personally, I would like to have a second weapon in case I lose these. Izuku said, revealing his chained blades. It will be a bit of time before I make a weapon based off our history, but it's nothing that I can't handle. Mei said, moving to work. What's your name? Bell asked, the red-haired young man. Oh, the name's Welf Kratzo. But you can just call me Welf. I am not a guy who likes formal speaking, especially those from the Far East. Welf said, as he smiled at the two. Well, nice to meet you, Welf-san. I'm Bell Cranel and this is Izuku Midoriya. Bell said, as Welf looked at him. You look like a super tough dude. If you need anything from me, just know that I can help out in the dungeon as well. Welf said, holding out a hand. I wouldn't have it any other way, Welf-san. Izuku said, smiling as an aura of manliness surrounded the two. The two shook their hands, a new bond of manliness forming between the two as Bell stared at the weird aura of the two. What the F was that? Bell thought to herself. Izuku went a step closer to the grieving girl before he noticed a small ping of danger sense coming from behind himself. Turning his head to look in the direction of who was causing danger sense to ping for him, he could have sworn that he'd seen a tuft of ash blonde hair move into an alleyway. A vision blurred in front of his mind of a psychotic young woman in a tan-colored cardigan as she raved on and on about BLD. And he shook his head at the vivid memory relapse as he walked over to Bell and Lily, making sure that they had someone nearby to keep them safe. Getting Lily to bury the bodies as well as say their prayers to the dead was really easy. Putting the multitude of bodies inside of it was another thing entirely. She had shown clear disgust towards a few of the Soma Familia members as she muttered about molesting BSTRDS under her breath. Izuku wasn't a fan of her wording, but at the same time he couldn't really blame her for her foul words towards the specific bodies. He wouldn't be very kind to those who molested him, if they even ever got the chance to do so. If anything, he'd rather die than allow someone else to suffer the same way. When a few hours had passed, the trio had walked over to the dungeon to gather some small amount of money. Considering they spent most of their day burying the dead for the Soma Familia, and as the day went on with the trio collecting magic stones, he could hear voices speaking to him. Useless. Deku, good for nothing. If you think I can stab him with my quirk hard enough that he'll scar. If you want a quirk in your next life, enough of that. I will not be forcing myself to relive those memories. Izuku angrily thought to himself. Izuku, are you alright? You're sweating quite a bit. And you never do that on the first floor of the dungeon. Belle asked, worriedly. I'm fine. Just some bad memories spiking up for some reason. I will tell you both about them soon, just now isn't the best time. Izuku said, as Belle and Lily stared at him for a moment before nodding. Walking through the dungeon, the trio were about to exit the dungeon itself before they noticed the time. It appears as though they were about to not make the time schedule for leaving the dungeon in time. Rushing through the door of the dungeon, they were almost locked inside of it for the evening, shuddering at the last time that happened. Izuku though let the two move forward further ahead so that they wouldn't pay attention to what he was doing. He stared at the door as another voice came back to haunt him from the land of the dead, a specific one he remembered taking out a few weeks before the Soma Familia had been killed. Please. Don't let me die. I don't want to die. I take back everything I said about Lilaruka. I will make sure that I never do this again. Please don't go. I don't want to be alone. Izuku grit his teeth as he stared at the blood stain that was on the ground from the door to the dungeon. Turning around, he walked towards the two girls who were staring at him with concerned expressions as he caught up with them. He began a new conversation with the two of them as they immediately caught onto what he was talking about and put in their opinions. Although a part of Izuku's mind had been stuck on the final words of the guy before he'd left him inside the dungeon to rot and die. I don't want to be alone. That is the last thing I had ever thought someone who was a greedy man would say. I never saw his family arrive to the scene of his death, but that doesn't mean that those within the Soma Familia were his family. Izuku thought as the trio entered the guild. You almost missed your time to escape the dungeon again. Why are you guys like this? The receptionist at the counter asked, with a pout. Sorry. Luna-san. We are just getting distracted lately, Midoriya-kun, so much more than usual. Belle said, apologizing. Don't worry about it, it's not like it'll ever happen to your little group. Anyway, you should all be getting around 1,500 valis each. Have a wonderful evening. Luna said, as she bade them farewell. Walking through the streets once again, the trio entered the shop to find Welf and May at their little argument again. This time, however, May was attempting to combine a minotaur tooth to a chestplate armor piece as Welf looked so done with his life. He noticed their presence as he smiled at the trio as Lily delivered some ores and monster loot as he thanked them for their service. Are you without a familia, Welf-san? Izuku asked, as Welf stared at him. You know what, I am. How did you know? Welf asked, smirking. I was just asking. I don't swing that way. Izuku said, as Welf belly laughed. I know. But you should have seen the look on your face. Anyway, thank you guys for the monster loot and ores. I can make some really good stuff with this. And to answer your question, Midoriya-kun, no, I am not in a familia. Welf said, as Izuku smiled a little. Would you like to join the Hestia familia? Izuku asked, as the young man froze. Why, you're sure that you want to have me join you guys? Welf asked, as Hatsum came out. Wait, I can easily join your familia as well. She asked ridiculously. Well, yeah. I never asked you since I thought you were married to your work ethic. Izuku said, as Mei just stared at him for a moment. Well, you are right about that. But I would love to join your familia, Izuku. What about you, red hair? Are you wanting to join? Mei asked. Well, I wouldn't be opposed to it. Who do you have to work with? Welf asked. Well, it's currently me and Midoriya-kun. Lily will be joining us tonight. Bell said, as Welf nodded. The goddess Hestia is the goddess of the hearth and family, so what the heck? I might as well join, I just hope that I'm treated as a normal person. Welf said, as Izuku pulled out a hand. Join us later this evening. Hestia-sama will be happy to allow you both in. Izuku said, with a smile. Count me in. Welf said, as Mei jumped onto Izuku's back. Heck yeah. She called out, causing Belle and Lily to glare at her in jealousy. On another rooftop nearby, a specific goddess was glaring at the trio of women with a very angry glare. And she was not really liking how close the dreadlock-haired girl was pushing herself onto the boy's back. I will get you to join my familia soon enough, Izuku Midoriya. I might allow your little girlfriend of Belle Cranel to join as well. Whilst I'm at it. Freya said, liking her lips. SHT, did I leave the stove on? Freya questioned herself before disappearing in a small magic circle. Dungeon exploration prelude. Izuku and the others had arrived at the church where Hestia was waiting for their day to end. What she wasn't prepared for, however, was the new additions of Mei and Welf. She cried tears of joy at the prospect of earning 2 new familia members as she began the ritual to make sure that they join her familia. With that going through, Lily had already been turned into a Hestia familia member the previous night, so the trio had walked to the back of the church. Izuku was sitting at a small desk as he wrote something down in a notebook as Belle and Lily noticed him being very focused on his task. Walking over to him, they looked over his shoulder as they watched what he was doing on the small notebook paper. They were surprised to find out that Izuku was actually drawing them when they were in their battle gear. The first drawing pictured Belle in her armored appearance inside the dungeon. She was wearing a small amount of armor on her chest and arms, especially showing the small sheath for her knife she aptly named the Hestia knife. Her armor was on the ground, having been broken off her chest and arms, the only thing protecting her left wrist being the small green metallic sheath. Her black cloak-like shirt billowing in the wind as she held a long sword in one hand to her right as it was pulled back, whilst the Hestia knife was in her left hand in a sideways hold. She still had her knee guards on over her black pants as she glared at whoever was looking at her on the other side of the image. Belle also took notice of how Izuku had drawn some flames around her form as it made her look even more badass than she really was depicted in the drawing. And once Izuku was finished with that image, he moved on to Lily's own image as it showed her in a happy expression on her face staring at Belle in the background. In this image it portrayed the two standing near the Tower of Babel, and she was holding an arm in the air as she smiled at the person outside of the portrait. She was wearing a large white cloak with a hood that covered most of her dark brown hair that was shown to be a bright red in the sunlight. Her very large bag of supplies on her back as her ears were hidden underneath the hood where nobody could see them. The cloak left nothing to the imagination in terms of her chest as it protruded a little bit, showing that she had a small but nice bust size. Lily, when seeing this, was surprised to see that the background was of Orario with the sun setting in the background. The two were about to interrupt Izuku when they saw him flip the page to show Mei and Welf inside their forge working on their next forged weapon armor. Mei was seen with her arms in the air, a wide-open smile as she seemingly cackled out to the heavens, whilst Welf, who was in the background, was shown to be smiling softly at a new weapon. It was a small knife that was red in color as well as made from the Minotaur that both she and Izuku had defeated about 2 weeks ago. Both were drawn with such efficiency that Belle and Lily just continued to watch as Izuku drew each person with terrifying accuracy. But then came the final person in their familia that he had shown to them unconsciously. Hestia. She was shown to be in her normal fit of clothing, but instead of the white short dress with frills, she was wearing a white sundress with a small straw hat on top. A light blue sash moving across her chest as it flew in the wind around her before they saw the look in the goddess's eyes. They were shown with such extreme happiness, they were unaware of the fact that Izuku was drawing the rest of their familia around her with smiles on their faces. Belle and Lily just smiled at the drawing as they continued to watch Izuku draw. More and more pictures that seemed to be lifelike. However, the two girls noticed how Hestia's melons were definitely shown a lot more through the sundress. The next morning Izuku woke up at his desk as he stretched his body thinking about whatever was supposed to happen today. But as he looked around the surrounding area, he found that he wasn't outside in the real world at this point in time. He was currently inside One for All as he stood before the previous bearers of One for All. They looked at one another as they smiled at him before they spoke to him about the good news based on the information they have. Ninth, it appears as though that in your death in your world that my brother had faded from that plane of existence. Yoichi said, as Izuku just sat there confused. Didn't he have the strength to kill me though? I thought he did. Izuku muttered as the vestiges smirked. You managed to complete something that we never could in the 100 years since All for One has reigned on Earth. You had defeated our enemy and kept him from surviving. The damage you dealt to him was so much that his body couldn't recover fast enough to regenerate. All Might's vestige said, as he smiled at Izuku. Wait, does that mean? Izuku asked, as the other vestiges nodded. All for One has been erased from existence in our world. Not only that, but from what we could feel from One for All it has been exactly 10 years since your death in our world. Yoichi said, as Izuku started to cry. At least everyone was safe. I never thought that I'd die against All for One B, but if it means that everyone can live safe and sound. So be it. Izuku said, with a tearful expression. With that sort of news said and over with, Banjo had walked over with a very serious expression on his face as he looked down at Izuku. Although Izuku did take notice how the man was slowly disappearing from the Vestige World, and as Izuku looked at the others in alarm he felt himself becoming more and more worried. What is happening? Are you all leaving me? Izuku asked, looking at each vestige. Young Midoriya, the power of One for All has reached singularity. And because of that, you will be holding the power until the end of your life. But that doesn't mean that you can't finally live the life of a teenager that was strppd away from you in our world. The Vestige's mission of defeating All for One has been completed by you, albeit indirectly. Because the mission was completed, they are fading from existence. All Might said, as his form just stayed solid. So they're all leaving me behind? Izuku asked, as All Might shook his head. Nope. I won't be leaving your side. What kind of teacher would I be if I just left you high and dry? Haha. Worry not, young man, for now and about a few years, I am going to remain here. All Might said, as he flexed his arms. Our mission is complete, but your new life is just beginning. We are leaving because our mission is complete, and we will be passing through the realms of the undead. We've been alive for hundreds of years, and we are being put to rest. Although Yagi has been here the least, he will be gone within the next year and a half. Now stop beating around the bush with those women. And just get laid already. Banjo said, as his form suddenly disappeared. As the other vestiges barring All Might and Nana Shimura disappeared, the woman was staring at Izuku with a look of pride. She then smirked at All Might and Izuku and pulled the two in for a big hug, and as she squeezed the two of them into her very voluptuous chest she giggled as the two blushed crimson. Don't worry about us, Izuku. We'll still be here, just faded and our quirks still with you in remembrance. Nana said, as she looked to Yagi. I'm so proud of what you've become, Toshinori. Make sure that Izuku doesn't fall down the path of villainy within this world, otherwise I will come out of my dead retirement to beat you to death with a hammer. Nana said, before suddenly disappearing in a small cloud of white motes of light. I think I'm afraid of my MSTR. Toshinori muttered to himself, shuddering. What's the worst that can happen, All Might? Izuku asked, with a tilt of his head. You wake up to getting a BLWJB. All Might muttered before sending Izuku out into the outside world. As soon as Izuku was moved out of the Vestige World, he looked under the desk to find that nobody was there and let out a sigh of relief. Before thinking about it, how did he even know to look down there to make sure nothing was wrong with his pages? Whatever, he needed to get prepared for the exploration of the dungeon today. There was going to be a very big expedition by the other famous familias as they were going to see how far they could make it in the dungeon without leaving it. And based on the information he'd heard from everyone, they couldn't reach further than floor 10 of the Tower of Babel. So as he left the small side room, he entered the main building as he found that Welf and May were arguing about whatever new forge item they'd be making. However, Izuku did take notice that some of his drawings were placed up around the building as he stared in awe of them. How someone from the Familia had managed to pry his notebook out of his sleeping hands he wouldn't know, but it looked nice to have them on the walls. He gathered his supplies for the multiple-day journey inside the dungeon when he was pulled to the side by Lily and Belle. He was confused by what the two wanted from him before he saw their pouts, and as he was about to ask what was wrong, they showed him the picture of Hestia as they pointed at her chest. "Any reason why you are drawing Hestia-sama's melons this large?" Belle asked, with a somewhat smug smirk on her face. I just drew them from what I thought they were. If I got their size wrong, I'm sorry, I'm not much of someone who draws the chest sizes of random people," Izuku said, shuffling his feet. "Don't worry, you didn't get her measurements wrong. I'm just mad that you drew them so perfectly, meanwhile you made me look like I'm flat," Belle said, as she pointed at her own melons as a reference. Why are you trying to get me to look at your sea chest?" Izuku asked, blushing madly. "Because she was wanting you to get a good look at them. She's mad that you didn't make her melons look quite as good as ours," Lily explained as Izuku stared at her. "Why, you saw me drawing last night?" Izuku asked, as both girls nodded. "Why did you make my chest smaller then?" "Lily's?" Belle asked, as she comically threw her arms around in the air. In the pose it would be very hard to depict your melons in that form. I made it flat because it would save me time and make the image look better," Izuku mumbled as he looked away. "Wait, are you saying that my melons would have gotten in the way of the image?" Belle asked, as Izuku nodded. I don't like drawing bee melons because of the fact that they can change positions in battle. I had a classmate who had her melons hanging out from her hero costume, and I was shown a lot of cleavage when she fought," Izuku said, looking away pointedly. "Alright, you're forgiven. I know that my melons are not very big, but I at least want a drawing where you get their firmness as well as size correct," Belle said, pouting. Izuku just stared at her for a moment before steam slowly flew out of his ears as his brain fried from that little conversation alone.